extended their hand to the surviving scientists, their eyes fixed on rockets and new technology, but they were maybe blind to the dark lineage that
Welcome to the Unrefined Podcast. I'm Brandon Spain, along with Lindsay Waters and BT Wallace, and together we explore the mysteries of the seen and the unseen, challenge conventional perspectives, and navigate the profound truths of our world, all through a biblical lens. Stay connected with us and gain exclusive access to our sponsors-only portal at unrefinedpodcast.com. Now, for this week's episode. Hey, you guys. This week, we're delving into this topic, Operation Paperclip. This time, it is BT in the hot seat. He's done some research, and we're all going to jump in and just explore what he has to say.
So we wanted to start a new series, right? We wanted to do some deep dive into Operation Paperclip.
Yeah.
What was our drive? Why did we want to do this one, guys? What was up with that?
I think it's just, if I remember correctly, a few months ago, we were just thinking about something we could do that would be a deep dive, and we've already done our Laurel Canyon. And this kind of goes hand in hand with the Laurel Canyon, the connection to Jared Leto's house, whatever it was called, the Air Force Base.
Lookout Mountain?
Yeah, Lookout Mountain. And so that kind of stimulated this. And then, just right now, we're recording this before the election, you guys. You probably won't hear it till after. But, just the whole Operation Mockingbird aspect of the media. And so we just wanted to start looking at these different psy-op kind of things. We also, kind of as a synopsis, kind of want to wrap it up with the spiritual ramifications of all that kind of stuff. So, yeah, I think that's how we grooved into it.
Yeah, we felt that there was something more here than simply a case of government trying to shore up their own... Mm-hmm. Their own technologies and their own resources and their own methods and madness.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And I was speaking to you, Brandon, about how I really felt there was some kind of spiritual force, something that was driving the Third Reich. I mean, it seems to be obvious. I mean, anybody who's listening is probably going to agree with that there was definitely something sinister force related with the Third Reich.
But yeah.
It may have got started some way. I mean, the world was a really strange place after World War I, and the demilitarization of Germany and the rise of nationalism was really common across the globe. And I think there was a really interesting drive with a lot of these societies and things that popped up. And I was talking to you, Brandon, about it, going, gosh, man, I think that the regime, the Third Reich and the Nazi regime, didn't end at the Nuremberg trials. I really felt that there was some kind of spirit driving it.
Yeah, you said it. I was wondering if we could say the N-word, and I don't mean the racial one. I mean the
due to the fact that this is for educational purposes.
We can say Nazi.
Capable of saying Nazi.
Yeah,
because that's who we're talking about.
Be flagged.
We can't get away from. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, because we were talking about how Nazi in itself, that quote that I heard somewhere, I don't remember who said it, but basically Germany lost the war, the Nazis just relocated. And
and I think that we call them that.
Yep.
We call them that, and they just relocated, but they were motivated by something deeper. And
yes.
Mm-hmm. And as I dug into this, I really felt that there was a story that few were even willing to tell, and it seemed to stretch far beyond the war-torn fields of Europe and the cold, calculated halls of the Nazi laboratories. And we were diving into Operation Paperclip. We were looking at this, and I really think it begins not in the flames of the 20th century, but I really believe it begins in an earlier epoch when angels descended to earth. And the book of Enoch calls them the Watchers. They're mentioned in the book of Daniel as Watchers. They fell with forbidden knowledge. They brought a spark that would set humanity ablaze. And it was from that union with the daughters of men we learn about the Nephilim, these monstrous giants or beings of great power. And not merely just great power, but great ambition. And it seemed that this is where the twist begins. This is where we first see a twisting in the natural order, a reshaping it to the secrets, methods, and ideas that never should have seen the light of day. And that's where I'm beginning with and I think that's where we're beginning with this Operation Paperclip, is that we're just going to paint this image of where it comes from. Because in the United States during, the 1930s, we have things like eugenics, where people are literally experimenting on other people. I honestly believe it didn't begin there. But I really think that from the time of the Watchers, the time of the Nephilim, and through time, that this knowledge that they had brought lingered and it passed generation to generation like some kind of seething, dark, foreboding current beneath the visible flow of history. And it only pops up every now and again, and we could see it in rituals, whispered oaths, and in secret societies or secret orders. And it was, you could say, from the Tula Society to the Black Sun Society, the Rosicrucians. There was a reborn of the Templar Order.
Yeah, I was going to say Templar.
And it seems like their teachings carried with them the seeds of this power, this alchemy, this war, this insidious study or science. And the scientists involved in the Third Reich were eugenicists. There were eugenicists in America. There were eugenicists in Russia. It wasn't merely rockets and bombs. There was more going on. And I think that the Watchers didn't just teach humanity how to wield fire or forge steel, but how to remake flesh and how to see creation itself as malleable, controllable.
Yeah. Well, what I want to ask you is do you think there's a connection between this secret knowledge and going back to the Enochian type magic? Is that something different than the Enochian knowledge that has been passed down through what Gary Wayne calls the Serpent Brotherhood, or I'm sure there's other names for it, but it's been carried down through all these different secret societies. Yeah, I find it interesting when I do my part, my research part of it. It seems like every branch of those arts or sciences are hit by the Nazis, almost like they're trying to create a culture based on those watchers' knowledge that they gave to them. Does that make sense?
Well, take a side branch on the idea of the Enochian magic. That we spoke about that briefly, I believe, in our Laurel Canyon episode where we're painting the picture of the sinister forces. Enochian is what we call it today. It comes from Dr. John Dee and Edward Kelly. They didn't call it that. However, conversing with entities that are on the other side of somewhere is what they were doing using a seer stone. And one probably should draw the conclusion they were talking to the Watchers imprisoned in Tartarus. That would probably be the best assumption, is that they were somehow able to glimpse that reality and
Yeah.
receive messages from them. But whoever it is, whatever it is, it just seems that there was a current of occult magic involved, right? So if we were to just fast forward a little bit to the 1930s and we look at society, it's seething with discontent. They're not happy with the status quo. The Allies took away their military and basically, I mean, it was basically a police state enforced by the Allies. And so it's no small wonder why nationalism gains this fervor, why German supremacy is basically what's coming, and it's gaining a foothold and it's gaining power and it's gaining this momentum. And that means it was there in that smoke and rhetoric of a fractured Germany that these ancient whispers that people like John Dee, Edward Kelly had tapped into found new voices. They found new voices in men like Heinrich Himmler and his occult followers who crafted their own society.
Yeah, I noticed too, there's a line like a spectrum where you can't tell when the occult ends and the science starts. It's such an overlap of the
This is
involvement of it.
correct.
Yeah.
Remind audiences that this is also during the time of people like Aleister Crowley, who said that magic is science. Compare, it is the aim of magic, the method of science, by the method of science.
Parsons too, you know.
Everybody involved in
Yep.
this OTO
Yep.
is looking
Hubbard.
for repeatable occult rituals that you input, you get the same output. And it was this group run by Himmler. It's a so-called Nazi research division devoted to esoteric studies. And they sought not just the supremacy, not just like racial supremacy, but the revival of this old forbidden knowledge. And that's what we were speaking about. We were talking about how there was a desire to tap back into where everything came from. This power had originated. If it was in their Norse gods or whatever terms they had to coach it in, but they turned themselves to science with this esoteric zeal that no one has used before. And it was driven by a belief that beneath the methods of science, by scalpel and syringe, honestly lay the power to reach back into this forgotten past where gods walked among men and they can make man new again.
Yeah, I was just thinking, you just talked about the mindset and the things that were going on around that time. There was a huge, and it actually started in the late 1800s and was still kind of going on when the Nazis rose to power, called the German Youth Movement.
Yeah.
And it was just this almost semi countercultural. I mean, it looked a lot like
They were
the 60s.
countercultural.
Yeah. And there was some good, there was almost sort of a lot of Christian stuff going on within that. But I mean, it totally got co-opted by the Nazis. Just they came along at the I don't want to say perfect because that can sound good, but at the right time when all these different things were going on and just co-opted movements and things that were going on, they and just took advantage of the discontent of the German people, like they said, and it just everything was just in place for this to happen. You know?
Well, is that during the time? And I know you remember these names, like Jacob Blumhardt and his is it his son?
His son would have been involved in the German youth movement. I
Yeah,
think the stuff with the exorcism and stuff probably happened a lot earlier, but his son would have still was Christoph was involved in that
Christoph.
and
Yeah,
got politically involved in it
yeah.
around that time. So
To
yeah.
give you guys out there kind of a basis of what we're talking about, there was two men back in the 1800s that were Lutheran pastors who got introduced to the supernatural like through a demonic encounter. And actually, it's a really famous story that the father Johann Blumhardt exorcised this girl, and she screamed like bloody murder that Christ is victor, and that's kind of where the whole Christus victor type. It's not where the doctrine came from, but that's where another name for it came from. And his son actually didn't stay with the supernatural type stuff, the healing and the deliverance. He went more political into the German youth, and then you throw in, like Lindsay said, you throw in this is the time of Karl Marx. This is the time of even the beginnings of the rustlings of the Russians over there. You know, it's like you said, it's not perfect. It's just the right conditions. I mean, it could be like the perfect storm uh
Yeah. Yeah,
environments, but
Nietzsche's thus spake Zoroaster. Zarathustra.
Zarathustra. Yeah,
Yeah, it's a mouthful for anybody. It's his Greek name.
yeah,
That became real big and popular. I think
Yeah,
yeah,
Nietzsche. Yeah,
yeah.
Nietzsche was a
Adolf
big
and
part
his
of this
sister or
too.
something
Yeah.
like that was
The
huge. Yeah,
Ubermensch, the Superman.
correct.
That was
Yeah,
huge influence on all this stuff too. You know, what I think is interesting too, you're talking about the Nazis and it was just the right time. I think that's what Nazism, since it's a virus, it waits for an immune system. Okay. Just imagine that like a human body. And when immune system gets down, it's contagious to viruses. And I think even now that's going on in our nation, honestly, on both sides politically. I'm probably going to get crucified for that. But Nazism is trying to worm its way in here. But that's what it looks for. It looks for a host, and
yeah.
that's occultic.
That's this point. We take this. We take all of these things from the brown shirt, that boys and girls club of Germany, kind of idea, really. And you enter in the doctors, right? The Bloms, the Strugholds, and the Mengelas, and all these other individuals who are involved in this, who were more than mere researchers, more than just mere academics. They were vessels, if you will, of an ideology older than the Nazi Party itself, instruments of an agenda that, knowingly or not, trace back to the rebellious watchers. human experimentation, right? It's human experimentation, and their view wasn't simply a pursuit of progress. It was reclaiming this power right. What they believed was their right to control mankind, which clearly is a Watcher thing or a
Yeah.
Nephilim thing, as a way to harness those gifts that the fallen beings taught man in order to defy the creator.
Well, and two things there. It's not a coincidence that who do they attack the majority? God's chosen people. I mean, howbeit they might not be practicing Jews, but they're still ethnically the Jewish people. And so that was their primary target. I know they targeted gypsies and candy capped and other people like that, but they were after the Jews, which is interesting. And the other thing is
Always.
the Nazi symbol, which is not a Nazi symbol. It was an Indian occult symbol or an Indian
Well, it was supposed to be. It
God
was
thing.
supposed to be hammer of Thor set against a sun. Was what it was supposed to be.
Yeah.
And it changed through time. First and foremost, the swastika itself that is used by the Nazi Party is a flipped backwards swastika that is used
Yeah.
in the rest of the world. It literally was the 1930s, 40s that it took a symbol that literally meant forward progress and peace, and it turned it into something dark and evil and sinister.
Occult
by
inversion.
flipping it around.
Yeah.
And I think we've established so many things by inversing the things designed that are supposed to be good to propel people to the good. The enemy always reverses it. They always switch it, flip it around on us.
And if you think about it too, and this is a lot of hype in the truther movement and stuff, but I think there's some truth to this, is that the swastika is a broken cross. It's more like a broken plus sign, but the cross symbolism is still there. It's a broken cross. And I mean, it's not a coincidence they chose that symbol and then made it backwards. They could have chosen a million other symbols, and they chose that one. So definitely sinister force oriented.
And so when the Reich crumbles, when Germany lay smoldering under the weight of its ambitions, the knowledge didn't perish with the regime. The United States, who was driven by what had become Cold War paranoia, extended their hand to the surviving scientists, their eyes fixed on rockets and new technology, but they were maybe blind to the dark lineage that these men carried with them. Mm-hmm. And so Operation Paperclip wasn't just about smuggling the mines. It was the transmission of secrets that had been incubating for millennia, veiled behind the rational facade of science and progress.
And defense.
Yeah.
Always about defense.
Yeah. And one of the guys that I'm going to be talking about later said life in Germany was wonderful. It was utopia until Hitler started the war, which really tells us something about, what they were doing. And they pulled themselves out of the Depression. We were in the whole world was in the Great Depression, and he pulled it. And everybody knows economically, if you want to get out of depression, you start a war. I mean, we've been doing it for years. But I was just really, it took me aback that one of those guys said that, and I'm being kind of merciful. I kind of felt for them because they were bewitched. A lot of them were bewitched by those sinister forces into thinking that, hey, we can usher in a utopia here, and we just need to make everybody who doesn't believe in it go.
We need everybody to be white.
Well, yeah.
That's part of the problem.
But even then, they didn't like Frenchies. They didn't like Spanish, even though Francisco Franco was a part of this whole ordeal, and Benito Mussolini. But I mean, they had a plan to get rid of the Japanese as well. The Man in the High Castle really explored that book and that show, explored the whole love-hate relationship with the Japanese. So,
But go ahead, Lindsay.
Well, I was just going to say there was this whole liberation, see my quotation fingers here, movement that the Nazis sort of accomplished in Eastern Europe with different ethnic groups who were under the boot of the USSR. They're like, hey, go kill people for us and we'll liberate you. And maybe they thought, well, the Nazis think they're using us, we're using them. And I mean, that's another sad part of it. There were groups that were sort of liberated on the Eastern Front by by the Nazis. Some of them were from like East Asian groups that were, I mean, they were going to be next on the list as soon as
Yep.
the war was over.
Yep.
Just like the Japanese were eventually. So it's just sad. People thinking they could get control of this thing, you know?
Well, it always strikes me, and I use this analogy all the time, you guys, for a lot of things, but it really is so applicable to give our audience out there like an image of what Nazism and the philosophical and occultic underpinnings of Nazism is like venom. It's like that alien suit. You know, it finds somebody that's needy, that is their immune system is down, so to speak, and it attaches to it and it transforms that person. It was Brock in the comic and in the movie, and that is what Nazism. It's interesting when the Reich fell, Nazism split. It went two ways. It went east to the Soviet Union, China, and then other places we were in conflict, but it went west as well to America, Argentina, and particularly Hollywood, which will connect to a lot of the Laurel Canyon stuff, which we won't do it right now. But it's just really fascinating how it's just like a virus. Nazism is a
Yeah.
spiritual virus.
Yeah, it's what they brought with them. When Operation Paperclip came and these countries divvied up these men, they brought with them more than just engineering prowess. They
Yes,
brought more than just medical advancements.
that was the facade.
Embedded in their research were the echoes of the Watcher's corruption, whispers of biological dominance, the eugenic pursuit of the master race, and the unspoken belief that humanity itself could be altered, enhanced, or discarded like clay.
Mhm.
Wow, and that hits.
Yeah, so you guys, when I trace these sterile laboratories of Kurt Blom and the surgical suites of Hubertus Strughold, or the offices of Mengele, the Doctor of Death himself, I see more than white coats and cold steel. I see the shadow of the lineage that began when the angels taught men to become gods and paid the price with their fall.
Mm.
These scientists conducted human experiments. They didn't merely embody the ideology of a fanatic dictator. They were heirs to a diabolical betrayal, a reminder that the pursuit of forbidden knowledge from Babel to Berlin often leaves humanity on the brink of damnation.
Go into what you mean by the comparison between Babel and Berlin, what you're
Babel
talking
and
about.
Berlin.
Yeah, yeah, because I think a lot of people don't understand what the Tower of Babel was really about in your context to what you're talking about. Can you
Yeah,
elucidate that?
yeah. So when we look at the Tower of Babel, many of us will read the story how
Sunday school, how we were taught. Yep.
you'll get the Sunday school story, you'll get the biblical story. I mean, there's nothing wrong with the biblical text. I'm okay with that. I'm happy with, of course, and I agree 100% with it, and I accept it as infallible, the Word of God. But what do we have? We have Nimrod, who became a Gibborim through means of some ritual. You don't merely become a superhero. Hercules was born half man, half god. Gilgamesh was 3/4 human and a quarter, or 2/3, or whatever the division is. Gilgamesh was part god, but they were born this way. Our myth demigods, right? They're all born of man and God, so that's the Nephilim. Nimrod was not born a Nephilim. He was born a man, pottered around like a toddler. He learned society, learned how to write cuneiform. He learned how to be a human from his parents. He was involved with his culture and his society, and then through ritual, through arcane arts, through esoteric tradition or information, or finding forbidden knowledge, a weakness and desire for power, he becomes a Gibborim. He becomes a mighty man. And so it is said that, like Nimrod, a mighty hunter before the Lord, this is what he becomes. And in his ambition and in his power, he gets humans to build a tower to God. He takes the mantle, the desire of the fallen watchers, the fallen Bene Elohim. He takes their desire and their goal, and he convinces humans that they can storm the gates of heaven and reclaim what should have been theirs. And that's all it is. He's acting in this methodology, this madness to be God. And so he says, I'm going to go up to God and I'm going to confront him. And it's kind of amusing because the tables are turned. God says, yeah, I see these guys. They're doing something. Let us go down and see what's going on. And he sees. He's like, no, we're not repeating this. We're not going to do this. I've promised that I'm not going to flood the earth again, but I could stop it now. And he confounds their language, and we get the division of the languages. We get the division of the people. Whatever happens, this might be where the continents are formed, because it mentions, this guy when the nations were divided or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
Peleg.
So maybe here we get a lot of things going on.
I just see, as you're sitting here explaining this and listening, I just see a correlation. I see a pattern with what you're talking about with Berlin. And I'm using Berlin figuratively with the whole Nazi regime and Hitler. It's almost like they were trying to build their Tower of Babel. Would that be a fair assumption?
Instead of going and saying, hey, let us make bricks and bake them and build a tower, it's let us take humans who are fashioned out of clay and let's mold them into fashioned bricks.
That's a great metaphor.
And now I'm thinking about is Pink Floyd's The Wall, and I might be off, but it's like,
no, you're right.
Dude, we have to sift through the remnants of these dark experiments. And when we do that, we must ask ourselves, did we truly escape the grasp of the Nephilim's legacy? Or did we merely let it through some back door dressed in the garb of progress and national security?
Yeah. Well, I want to clear up this myth. And I'm going to caveat it first with, I love the United States and I'm glad I was born here. However, I want to clear up this myth that the empire that we live in, which it is an empire, does everything right and is on the side of justice. One man's freedom fighter is another man's terrorist. So it just depends on what side you're on. And in some situations, as we'll get later on, we've been proponents of just some of the same stuff that the Nazis have done even before we brought them over here, but then so much more after we did. And it's influenced the OSS at the time and then the CIA later. And that's just not a coincidence.
But there's more to this story, isn't there? I mean,
yes.
There's more than just governments willing to barter their souls for power or scientists turning a blind eye to suffering. So this was never just a war of men. It was a war of unseen hands. Ancient rivalries fought through the vessels of flesh and bone. So even though the knowledge the Nazis may have wielded, their ambitions that fueled them were not mere accidents to history, but were echoes of a design crafted long before the first empire rose or fell. And so if we think about it, Operation Paperclip was a lifeline, not just to preserve this technological prowess, but to continue the threads spun from the teachings of those who defied heaven.
Yes.
And all we did was we just took it here. We stood, and when I say we, I mean the American
United States
government stood at Nuremberg at the trials and got people to point fingers at other people so that they would have a life of luxury.
Yes.
Where their actions wouldn't be questioned here in the United States.
When even in one instance, which I'll get into my part of the podcast, von Braun, he was a hero. I mean, a lot of Americans think look at him. He left Nazi Germany and came over here. He started our rocket program and NASA. Mm-hmm. He's a hero, you know?
Stop me if you're going to talk about this, but the movie October Sky.
No.
I thought about that. Okay.
Yeah.
Jake Gyllenhaal did a movie in the late 90s, early 2000s called October Sky, where him and these kids, and I want to say Appalachian, maybe West Virginia coal mining town, are like rocket fanatics. They like to get together, and they just gush in that movie over Werner von Braun. He sends them a letter. He's a hero. He inspired them. I want to watch that movie again because the more I learned
Especially
about
now.
him in this, the more I was like, wow, just
Yeah.
the laundering of a person's reputation that happened in this paperclip thing.
Well, it reminds me of Hogan's Heroes, Clink, I used to
Right.
say, it was not me. It is not my fault. I was following orders. It's like that's the constant mantra that you
Yeah.
hear through all these guys. It's like they're all pointing fingers at each other and nobody takes, except for Hitler, honestly. I mean, he kills himself and takes responsibility, sort of. Well, not really, but at least y'all get what I'm saying. He knew he was the villain of the story, but there was a lot more villains actually worse than him in the story. And some of them we brought to here, which I think is the most important thing we want to.
Yeah.
And it's like you said, it's not just a government. We wanted to get the edge on the Cold War. That's how the conspiracy and conspiracy fact has always been played out. It's something much, much deeper, much deeper.
Yeah, we look at this operation and we see the scientists that were brought and the engineers that were brought over. And it reminds me of reading First Enoch when it talks about the Watchers teach man how to forge swords and how to go to war.
How to go to war. Yep.
But the thing is that's not all that happened. They wanted to take the daughters of men and mate with them and have children. And so the eugenics programs were more than just twisted science. They were literally a ritual, an enactment of the Watcher's legacy.
Liturgy. Interesting.
A belief that through bloodlines, humanity itself could ascend or maybe even reshape into an image of a higher being, be Nimrod.
Gibberim.
To become Gibberim.
Yeah.
And it was behind, when I looked at this, it was behind every clinical report, every experiment labeled as quote unquote necessary, was this haunting presence. Ooh, I'm getting goosebumps. This haunting presence of something older whispering in the ears of the willing.
Well, it reminds me of Lord of the Rings when they're in the mines of Moria and they awaken something much darker and much deeper, or even Cthulhu, the ancient ones. It's not just a peripheral, they were involved in the occult, they were dabblers. There was something much deeper going on with this whole movement. And you hit it with that whole Babel to Berlin.
The doctors, the engineers, those who plotted the stars, if you will. Hitler had his own astrologers, and they were all in service to the Third Reich. Men like Victor von Braun, who would go on to lead the American space race, they also carried with them not just papers and patents, but the ghost of that forbidden covenant. The Watchers' teachings had become embedded in the fabric of their work. The search for an unassailable super soldier, the pursuit of unlocking the potential in human genetics, they were not just military goals, right? They're part of that old ambition, that to reclaim what was lost when the Nephilim walked among us. And so it's why all these experiments were so extreme. They were willing to sacrifice humans for knowledge. In reading about these individuals, it seemed that there was this unspoken belief, if I can just assert that, unspoken belief that through pain, suffering, human pain, human suffering, that something powerful could be glimpsed, touched, I don't know, maybe even harnessed. And so I think there was more here than just brutality. There was a doctrine clearly passed down through secret societies, through sealed orders, through whispered in the dark conversations, from a dark echo when ancient kings with Nephilim blood running through their veins ruled and tried to ascend back to the heavens that had cast them down.
It is interesting, though, too, that we talk about the fall, interesting word, of the Third Reich, the fall.
Yeah, it was another fall, wasn't it?
Another fall. And it was brought on by a world war, other nations bound together to take down this one nation. So that, there's so many, there's not a direct correlation, but there's a lot of similarities. And the story is like Led Zeppelin says, the song remains the same. I mean, it's the same song being played out in a different culture, and it's even I keep giving glimpses of our future podcast, but it's even being played out now in our country, in the United States.
And so the American government, I mean, I could say this about the Russian government too, but specifically Operation Paperclip is an American thing. So the Americans, desperate for an edge, overlooked the cost of such knowledge. They didn't just import the intelligence. They imported an ideology, a blueprint of corruption that had mingled with progress. And the laboratories of the Cold War became temples in their own right, altars upon which sacrifice of ethics were made to a god called power. And so the question lingers, where does it end? Was Operation Paperclip just a transaction? Or was it the final turn of a key that had been crafted eons ago, waiting for the right lock? Did we inadvertently invite not just scientists, but the remnants of this ancient rebellion into our midst? And you guys, as I stared at these documents with the CIA documents, and they're all from microfiche, so they're all typed out in that same inevitable font that just went on. These were once classified documents of memos that they whispered of things like bioenhancement, covert human tests to make man better on the battlefield. And I wonder if we've really come that far from the days when angels sought to dominate mankind. Did we really come all that far from the fallen and the Nephilim bending the natural order to their will?
Well, it also makes you think that if we had the fall of the Reich, that what's going to happen when another nation tries to, we're better than we're going to ascend to the Most High. We're going to create MK Ultra. We're going to do Operation Montauk. We're going to, we in our way, our subtle way have.
Well, this is what's really interesting, right?
Yeah.
If we watch the TV show Stranger Things, I think this is a really good time to kind of bring up some of the stuff going on in this TV show because it's fresh in people's minds. It's still available on Netflix.
Yeah.
We watch Stranger Things, and there are Americans who are experimenting with going through a portal that would lead to the Upside Down. And then there are Russians who are doing the same experiments and getting the same results. This is what's going on with Operation. It's not just here in America that we've got these guys doing the space race. Russia put a dog in space or whatever. I mean, it wasn't merely us. There's so many operations. The space race was real. The Star Wars technologies were real. The ability to launch a rocket from Colorado and have it hit anywhere on the globe with the aid of Victor von Braun, Jack Parsons, was no longer like a theory. It is a fact. It is a literal fact that they can launch a rocket, have it go into space, and pinpoint anywhere on this planet to bring destruction and mayhem from the sky. And those were things that were brought from Operation Paperclip. And we're not the only ones with these technologies. The Russians have them. There's plenty of armed countries around the world who have been given the power of the sword. And it's only a matter of time when it will be used.
Well, let's talk for a second, if I can throw this out here, about Nietzsche and the whole Ubermensch. And I mean, that was obviously what Hitler was going after. He was heavily influenced by it. But I think I found it interesting. I read Nietzsche, years ago in high school, and he's thoroughly entrenched in the Greek mythology. I mean, a lot of his stuff, is very Dionysian. I actually learned that from being a fanatic of the Doors, and that's what led me to Nietzsche, because Jim Morrison was a Doors guy, which is another interesting coincidence. But yeah, it fascinated me that he gravitated to the Greek mythos of the Nephilim, and then that's what brought about the Ubermensch, the Superman mentality, and everything.
Yeah, I mean, there's a bunch of stuff that I found researching these specific kinds of ideas, if you will, trying to find this thread. I didn't just simply look here at Operation Paperclip. I was looking and seeing if I could pull on that black thread and see where it led or what other authors may have written about it.
Yeah.
And obviously, we've spoken about the Book of Enoch. You can read about other things in the pseudepigraphical work by James Charlesworth. There's the Book of Giants that was found among the fragments in the Dead Sea Scrolls, and that describes these rebellious actions of the Watchers and their giant offspring. But there was a book done by Roger Shattuck. Anyways, it's known as Forbidden Knowledge, the Promethean Myth and Pornography, and it's really interesting because he reflects on the myths of the past, like Prometheus and the falls of the Watch, all this. And then the forbidden teachings, and then the consequences involved, right? The Watchers, we read Enoch, it teaches, or the Bible teaches, how women can wear makeup. It's like the aim of makeup at the beginning here was propelled to cause lust. Dude, it's every single one of these things that the Watchers brought and gave to man was a violation of one of the 10 Commandments. That's what I see when I look at that information.
That's good. Yeah.
When the purpose of red lips and rosy cheeks, flushed cheeks, why? When a woman is aroused, her lips get darker, red, and their cheeks flush. And then what that does is that is a visual cue for men to see and then become aroused.
Yes.
By causing this to be created, you cause the other effect to occur. Women put up. Look, I get it. These days and age, you're trying to make yourself look more appealable in public, and a lot of that pressure is not men putting it on women, but women putting it on women.
Yeah.
And I could trace that thread and say brothels. Brothels were run and organized by a madam. A woman wanted women to look a specific way to encourage a specific client to act a certain way. Marks. I mean, this is the whole point of the sex trade. It doesn't matter if it's being operated today by men or women. It doesn't matter. The effects are the same. The goals are the same. To drive men into lust, which is a violation of one of the 10 Commandments. Power. The Watchers taught men how to make swords. A sword has only one purpose, and that was to kill other humans more efficiently up close and personal. It makes no sense when you already had the bow and arrow. You didn't have to have close range combat at all. You could have long distance combat. But by creating a sword, you made people get up close and personal, right? It's a blood thing. Everything that was taught from the Watchers in all of these myths, this fire, was designed to set our desires ablaze. Pride, wrath, lust, envy, sloth, acacia, all of those things were designed by the Watchers to cause us to have a rift with the Creator God.
And what's fascinating in the book we just read and we interviewed,
Yeah.
he talks, Anthony Delgado talks about the whole that aspect of what you're saying is that the knowledge was meant to come, but it was timing issue, not the content issue. So the fallen ones gave it to us before God wanted us to get it His
Well, it's the
way.
same with
It
the fruit in the garden, right? The
Yes,
knowledge of good and well, it wasn't like it wasn't knowledge of good and evil as in an Encyclopedia Britannica. It was experience of good and an experience of evil. Literally a consumption of knowing by experience what is good and by experiencing what is evil.
esoteric wisdom,
You
right?
see, right. And so the fall of man happens because we experienced, well, to experience evil, you have to do it. And that is the fall, right? It wasn't merely just to experience what is good to God. It was to do those things that were evil to the sight of God. And man did that. Adam and Eve did that in the garden in the first act of disobedience. And it continued. I mean, it continued obviously on. I was going to say we can read about kind of closing up a little bit here. We can read about these ideas about the Nephilim. L.A. Marzulli has a series of stuff on the Nephilim, but also there's Walton and Strauss in the Demons and Spirits in Biblical Theology.
Yeah, yeah.
He
John
sheds
Walton.
light. They shed light on how the ancient Jewish thought had perceived the Nephilim, and then obviously the influence of the Watchers. I spoke about eugenics. There's books and information out there about that. I do believe there's a book by Kevels, Kevles, In the Name of Genetics, I think it's called. It's an overview of the history of eugenics and how scientific thought in the 19th and 20th centuries adopted this ideas of improvement on not just improvement and controlled breeding. So when I talk about eugenics, one of the major individuals that were experimented on were people with Down syndrome. The seriously mentally retarded were experimented on. Twins were experimented on. Those who were medically diagnosed with dwarfism, gigantism. These things were all experimented on heavily in the eugenics process, to the point where literally today you can be, or infant growing in your womb can be tested, and your doctor can come to you and say there is a 33% chance that your child will be born with Down syndrome. Would you like to terminate?
Mm.
Is that or is that not controlled breeding?
Absolutely.
And so we
Yeah.
can look at something like Adrian Desmond, James Moore. They write a book exploring Darwin's theories, how it influences social ideas about race and selective breeding. A lot of these people, the founder of Planned Parenthood,
Margaret Sanger. Yeah.
Nazi
Yeah.
in all
Uh-huh.
rights, believed
Yeah.
in selective. Her main target audience was the black community, the African American community.
Yeah.
She wanted them
Yeah.
gone
To eradicate them. Yep.
through breeding.
And now one of the major parties carries that fruit on with reproductive rights. We're now in a fifth generation war. It's a war of words and what's said, and it proves the power of words. And you can just transform it from, oh yeah, you're not killing a baby. It's not abortion. It's reproductive rights. Everybody needs reproductive rights.
And then for resources for people who want a little bit more about the sinister forces and the interplay in the Third Reich regime, you could read Unholy Alliance. That's by Peter Levenda.
Yeah.
You could read Hitler's Monsters, which was a supernatural history of the Third Reich by Eric Kurlander. His was interesting because he discusses how the Nazi leaders merged the pseudo-scientific beliefs with
Right.
the occult tradition. He basically takes the occult tradition and the pseudoscience and he draws them together, showing these parallels to the ancient idea on the forbidden stuff. There's plenty of documents on Operation Paperclip. There's a book we'll probably mention in later episodes. There is a book, I can't remember the name off the top of my head, but it was done by this Annie Jacobson.
Operation Paperclip, the secret intelligence program that brought the Nazi
I think
scientists to America. Is it another one that she wrote?
yeah, I think this is the one
Yeah.
where she talks about Area 51.
Yeah. She has an Area 51 book. Yes.
Yeah, Area 51, The Uncensored History of America's Top Secret Military Base. That's what it was called.
Okay. Yeah.
She touches on how these scientists, the knowledge fueled the U.S. aerospace and military projects using some of this stuff. But anyways,
Just real quick,
yeah,
that's a good question that arises out of this is in what ways, I mean, I don't care about the space program. What ways have we benefited from some of this knowledge that
there's
ultimately
been a
came
lot
from
of
the
benefits, a
Nazis?
lot of health and
Tons.
medical benefits.
Yep. Yeah.
Blood transfusion. I mean, there's all sorts of stuff that has been done. Maybe dialysis. I mean, there's these weird machines that came out of this Cold War era. But if you look at it, yes, they're great and wonderful and awesome things that do prolong the life of man, but are we doing it unnaturally?
Do the ends justify the means?
Or you could even simplify it to a 3-word question: at what cost?
At what
Yeah.
cost? Yeah. Yeah. You were talking about the whole Area 51, and to me, over this journey I've been going through for the past several years of being red pilled or whatever, sorting through the garbage and the good stuff, I always see this overlap between intelligence and the occult. No matter what intelligence, whether it be Mossad or whether it be whatever the Russian one is now, I forget what it is. It's not the KGB anymore; it's something else. But even back during the KGB, and obviously, the our 3-letter agencies as well. There's always some sort of an occult of involvement in this. It's never just pure science or pure subterfuge, so to speak. Am I right to see that, or am I?
I believe it.
I don't want to project, but I mean, even from our Laurel Canyon episode, the occult elements in the whole CIA attempt to create a counterculture. Well, what do you think the Nazis did?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Yeah, I was double checking this book here real quick.
We're going to put a list of these books, you guys out there, in the show notes that you can check out. We'll have to remember all the ones we've named, but we'll put a list out there, you guys, for you to do some further research, and maybe you can pull the threads that we're pulling on.
Yeah, there's just a couple more. The stuff on the Watchers, if you haven't read Brian Godawa's stuff, The Watchers and Their Legacy, that's a really good book. He basically takes the main parts of his research and puts it into a more, I guess you could say, a little bit more of a research style book instead of The Watchers Chronicles, which is obviously, designed to be fiction. But he takes a lot of his background research and puts it into one volume. There's a couple of individuals who write books about the weapon. There's a series, I think it's a 2-volume series about the weapons of mass destruction. And it's like the history of like chemical warfare, because that was a big part of the Nazi regime, was using chemical warfare in it. I mean, otherwise, that's the gas chambers, trigger warning, but it was chemical warfare. And I think there was some sinister, beyond just humans wanting to be horrible to other humans, going on there.
Yeah.
So while there's still echoes in the data, still stuff hidden in the margins of the reports, I mean, they're in sealed files to this day, probably locked up in filing cabinets that no one dares to open from this time period. Some basement room in FBI headquarters in Washington, D.C., waiting for, I don't know, some kind of spooky investigator to open the office door and start investigating these things.
Reminds me of that scene in Indiana Jones at the end when the warehouse. Yep.
But maybe that's where we're going to find the truth. That's where we're going to find the evidence that what began with the fall of the Watchers didn't end with their destruction with the flood. It merely went underground, waiting for the right time, the right war, the right men to bring it forth again.
And it recruited men. That's significant too. We are the only image bearers that God ever made. Elohim are not image bearers. We have to remember that. And so, these Watchers took God's kids and made them rebels.
That's right. Well, cool. Thanks for listening. It was a good show.
Yeah.
Look forward to the rest of the series.
That's right, guys. If like I said, there'll be some links to some of these books in the show notes, and I also want to put out there too, you guys. We have a group where we discuss different things and topics like this in Unrefined Friends. It's a Facebook group. You need to ask. It's a private group, but you can ask to be in it. It's free. And we'd love for you to get on wherever you listen to your podcast and give us a 5-star rating. Yeah. But
the ratings and reviews is how we get these podcasts in the ears of the right audience.
Yeah, that's right. And
it's through the support of our listeners that is made possible.
Yeah. So thank you for all you guys out there that are listeners. We appreciate you.
Like, share, and subscribe.
Boom. Thanks for listening and supporting us. And remember, stay naturally supernatural.